recording now. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much again for being here. My name is Dr. Patricia Gonzalez and I serve as Assistant Dean for Inclusive Practice, and I'm representing the College of Arts and Sciences today as well. Juneteenth is the oldest national celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. The observance of June 19 as the African American Emancipation Day has spread across the United States and beyond. Today's celebration not only honors African American freedom and emphasizes education and achievement, but is also a day, a week, and continuous month of celebrations, marking guest speakers and bringing families together through picnics and other opportunities like even music festivals. It is a time also to reflect, rejoice, and a time for assessment and self-improvement so that we can create a better future. So we're super excited to welcome you to today's event and super excited to also just give you the opportunity to learn and unlearn some of the things that we know or we may not know about today's celebration. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you, Marisha, to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marisha Lopez. I'm the Program Manager for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, also representing the Office for Inclusive Practice in the College of Arts and Sciences. And I will pass it over to John now.
Thank you. Good afternoon, officially afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I am John Robinson Miller IV. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Associate Director for the Center for African and African American Studies. If you don't know about the cause, we are new on campus. Wait, everybody can hear me? Yes. We are new on campus. We are excited to be here. Keep a lookout, and I believe Patricia is going to drop the cause link in there. Look out for our list of fall and spring programs that we're going to be coming really soon. We're going to get there. And last thing, the mission for the Center for African and African American Studies is to research, promote, preserve, interpret, and disseminate knowledge about the histories, cultures, and arts of African, African American, and the wider world of the African diaspora. So we're excited. We are. I get it. Sorry. I'm going to get back to like what I'm actually supposed to be doing. I can talk about the cause all day. Okay, so I am here to introduce our amazing speaker for today. So Dr. Tina, oh, excuse me.
Hey, I'll take it.
I mean, yeah, I'll give it to you. Absolutely. Brilliant. Tina D. McDaniel is a retired human resource professional, passionate social justice advocate, and diversity, equity, and inclusion leader. She is particularly proud of her work to bring visibility to the history of the African American community in her region. Tina completed her master's degree in organizational leadership. As a certified diversity professional, she has completed certification programs through Cornell and Northwestern University. She serves on many community boards, including King University Institute for Faith and Culture, Arts Alliance of the Mountain Empire, and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Alliance for the Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia, and Northeast State Community Colleges Inclusive Excellence Advisory Board. I mean, just the receipts that she comes with. So she currently works as a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional for a local nonprofit. So Tina resides in Bristol, Tennessee, with her husband, William. Let's welcome Tina.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I am so happy to join you this afternoon. It's this afternoon for me. I guess it's still kind of lunchtime for you. But thank you, Dr. Gonzalez, for the invitation to be a part of your Juneteenth celebration. I'm really honored that you even asked me. I'm right in the midst of current planning for Juneteenth in our region, and Juneteenth has really blossomed in our area. Within a 1 hour radius of where I live, there are 5 celebrations. So there is really a lot going on with Juneteenth, and we're really excited about that. Now, I told Dr. Gonzalez that I am not a historian by any stretch of the imagination. So my take on Juneteenth is going to be that from a layman's perspective, and also from someone who's really concerned about the visibility of the African American community in my region. I work alongside an organization called Black in Appalachia. And the work that we do is really bringing visibility to those stories and those narratives, those stories that no one ever talked about, no one was taught. So that's really my interest and my interest in Juneteenth. So Patricia, thank you for the reminder. I think I'm going to pass it over to someone for a land acknowledgement. Mhm.
Thank you. Let me just find my script here. As we gather, we honor and acknowledge that the University of Colorado's 4 campuses are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, Lakota, Pueblo, and Shoshone nations. Further, we acknowledge the 48 contemporary tribal nations historically tied to the lands that comprise what is now called Colorado. And I will pass it back over to you.
Okay, well, thank you. I really appreciate the land acknowledgement. I am in the area of the Eastern Cherokee. So I recognize and acknowledge that territory as well. So, Patricia, do you have is the presentation up? Okay. We can go to the next slide. So I shared with you just a little bit about my passion to bring visibility to the history of the African-American community. That is really, at this point in my life, that's kind of like my mission. So what you see here is just a proud moment. And last year, October 2021, we were able to dedicate a historical marker for Charles Spurgeon Johnson, and he's the gentleman on the right. Charles Spurgeon Johnson was born in Bristol, Virginia. So my city is a city that's in 2 states, Tennessee and Virginia, but Charles Spurgeon Johnson was born in Bristol, Virginia. So a little bit about him: he's a noted author, sociologist, and he was the first Black president of Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. And it was one of those stories that no one ever knew anything about. So as soon as I learned in 2018 that he was born in my city, it was an effort to kind of work toward a historical marker dedicating a marker in honor of Charles Spurgeon Johnson. So the picture on the left is a picture of me with Jay Johnson, and Jay Johnson was the former Secretary of Homeland Security under President Obama, and Charles Spurgeon Johnson was his grandfather. So the Johnson family came in for that historical marker dedication. So I say all that to say, this is my passion. This is something that is extremely important to me, and where I spend a lot of my time bringing those stories to the forefront. So I consider myself a community activist, a local African-American history enthusiast, a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, and a change agent in my region. Patricia, next slide. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to get started to ask you some questions about Juneteenth to kind of gauge your knowledge of Juneteenth. So Patricia is going to help me out with some poll questions. So are we ready?
Can you all see the poll questions? Okay.
Okay, what was the first state to celebrate Juneteenth? Okay, when did you, are we still on that poll? Okay.
No, you can do the second one now.
Okay, the second one. So I'm looking at, it looks like around 60% say Texas. Some say, I don't know. We've got Virginia there, California. Okay, it was Texas, 1980. When did you first learn about Juneteenth? Okay, Patricia, I only see like one of the options.
Okay.
Okay.
So we have about 72% of the participants who said a couple of years ago, 24 who are saying recently, and 4% said I've known all my life.
Okay, and that's about right, because I've talked to several individuals and many had not heard of Juneteenth or knew anything about Juneteenth until around the 2020 timeframe. So who is considered to be the grandmother of Juneteenth? Okay, Patricia, can you respond on that one?
Yes, so we have 6% who said Dorothy Height. We have 13 who said Fannie Lou, and then we have Opal Lee with 14%, and 67% of the participants don't know.
Okay, so Opal Lee from Fort Worth, Texas is considered to be the grandmother of Juneteenth. So I'll talk a little bit about her as I move forward in the presentation. So thank you for participating. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you, Tina.
So again, today I will be sharing about Juneteenth. I would like to kind of break down the conversation. I'll talk about the history of Juneteenth. Also share, there are some nuances whenever you look at Juneteenth. The celebrations are different in different areas. And then I'll talk about some contemporary concerns around Juneteenth. And then just kind of share personally, from my perspective, why I feel Juneteenth is significant. So again, we took the poll. Many Americans had not heard of Juneteenth until 2020, as we grappled with the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. When we think about George Floyd, we think about the 9 minutes or so that Derek Chauvin knelt on Mr. Floyd's neck and hearing him call out for his mother. Ahmaud Arbery, we think about him being pursued and chased down by 3 white men and tragically murdered while jogging in his community. And then some 2 months before an arrest was made. So I want you to think about the word delay. Breonna Taylor, police officers forced entry into her apartment while she was sleeping, and she was fatally shot. So there was a heightened awareness of Juneteenth in 2020 because of these different situations. And I read an article in the New York Times, it was in 2020, and it talks about the cyclical impact of Juneteenth, where tragedies occur within the African-American community, then there's this hyper focus on Juneteenth. So in that article, it talks about during the civil rights movement, whenever there was this heightened awareness around civil rights, then there was this hyper focus on Juneteenth. It talks about Rodney King and that beating and how we saw that on television. For those who remember or are familiar with the Rodney King situation in California, then after that, there was a hyper focus again around Juneteenth. So there's this cycle whenever it comes to Juneteenth. And then whenever we think about our freedom and our rights, we think about whenever there is progress that is made, then often there's a backlash associated with that. So there's this cycle. But really, Juneteenth celebrations began over 155 years ago, before these murders even occurred. Patricia, thank you. So Juneteenth, it's called many different names. The Emancipation Day, Black Independence Day, Jubilee Day, Celebration Day, Freedom Day, and Liberation Day. And whenever you look at these titles, all of these titles represent the celebration of freedom and jubilance. So a little bit about the history, because this provides the backdrop of Juneteenth. So the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation is an important backdrop when we talk about Juneteenth. So the Emancipation Proclamation was drafted in September 1862. It was later signed by President Abraham Lincoln in January 1863. So think about that. The Civil War began in 1861, and was still in progress when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863. Another thing to think about as well is that the Emancipation Proclamation only applied to those Southern rebellious states. So the Northern enslaved were not freed under the Emancipation Proclamation. Think about delay, the word delay again. The Civil War ended with General Lee's surrender on April 9th, 1865. Next, Patricia. So after General Lee's surrender, the end of the Civil War, Union General Gordon Granger arrives in Galveston, Texas with a proclamation on June 19th, 1865. 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, some 250,000 enslaved African Americans were declared free. Think about that word again, delay. Patricia, if you could show that video, please.
Can you hear it?
Yes, I can.
My name is Marcia Chatlin. I'm a professor of history and African American studies at Georgetown University. I'm a historian of African American life and culture. Juneteenth is a commemoration holiday of June 19th, 1865, when a group of African Americans in Galveston, Texas, received the news that they indeed were free. President Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, but news of the end of slavery in Texas had not traveled to this community until 1865. Since then, Juneteenth has been a day of commemoration of the struggle against slavery and a celebration of freedom. One of the biggest misconceptions about Juneteenth is that people often think that was the day that slavery ended in the United States. But in fact, the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in the United States, was passed in the Senate on April 8th, 1864, and the House on January 31st, 1865. Although Juneteenth celebrates the knowledge that slavery had ended, it's important to remember that the conditions that mirrored slavery, whether it was Jim Crow or the suppression of civil rights or continued struggles to fight racism, those continued long after the end of slavery. And so the Juneteenth holiday reminds us of where we've come, and it also inspires us to think about the places we want to go. As African Americans left the South to pursue opportunities throughout the 20th century in northern and western cities, the celebration of Juneteenth moved from being a Texas-based celebration to a national one, in which people gathered with families and friends and community to remember the incredible struggle of a people against slavery and to create new traditions that allowed them to reflect about the struggle for civil rights and the ongoing struggle against racism. Although slavery was abolished in 1865, the fight for civil rights has continued to the present day. So Juneteenth provides people with a sense of encouragement and inspiration to continue to fight on behalf of their community and their families for freedom. And it also is a holiday that, as it continues to become more and more popular, it allows people to look back at the past and encourages them to learn more about African American history. As more and more institutions recognize Juneteenth and work to commemorate the incredible legacy of slavery in the United States, I hope Juneteenth becomes a day where people commit not only to acts of justice in their local community, but to investigate history in a more deep and thoughtful way.
Thank you, Patricia.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you. So when we talk about Juneteenth, there have been celebrations that have occurred for some 157 years. There are many different ways in which folks celebrate, and Patricia, in your opening comments, you mentioned several of those ways: parades, marches, dancing. Faith and community is involved. There are pageants, there are picnics, there are programs. I'm not sure what kind of celebrations are occurring in Boulder. So maybe you can put it in the chat. Are there any celebrations in Boulder? Oh, so John says there are quite a bit.
I will put the causes list in the chat.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, it looks like quite a bit. As I was doing the research, I saw about the Juneteenth celebration in Denver. So it looks like there's quite a bit of activity that is occurring in your area. So one of the things that happens in Juneteenth is this focus on red food and drinks. Has anybody heard of that? The red food and the red drinks? So there have been stories that have been passed down generationally, and they say that the red symbolizes the blood of the enslaved millions who suffered and died. And then others say that the history of the red food goes back to the African continent. So I would say it's probably a combination of the two, but there are stories of why we have the strawberry red soda, the red velvet cake, and all of that. But in any event, celebrations are happening. The song that comes to mind is the African-American picnic song by Frankie Beverly and Mays, Joy and Pain. So in joy and in pain, the African-American community continues to celebrate and has celebrated for 157 years. Patricia, the next one. So one of the poll questions was, who is considered to be the grandmother of Juneteenth? And that's Ms. Opal Lee. And I absolutely love this woman. I love her spirit. I love her energy. I love her persistence. She kind of inherited this name because she was just vigilant and persistent to see Juneteenth become a national holiday. She's in Fort Worth, Texas. And for years, I don't know how many years exactly, but for years, she would walk 2.5 miles on Juneteenth. And that 2.5 miles represented how long it took for African Americans in Texas to hear that they were free. And she always said, she has such energy, she would always say, whenever it happens, I'm going to do my holy dance. So it's going to be off the chain is one of the things that she says. But one of the reasons why, or probably the most important reason why Juneteenth is important to Ms. Opal Lee is that whenever she was either 10 or 12 years old, her parents purchased a home in a predominantly white neighborhood outside Fort Worth, Texas. On June 19th, 1939, a mob of hundreds of white rioters burned down her home. As a result, Ms. Lee says, the fact that it happened on June 19th spurred me to make sure people understood that Juneteenth was more than just a festival. So Patricia, if you'll go to Ms. Opal Lee's video. Thank you.
This is the pen that President Biden used to sign Juneteenth into law. I'm Opal Lee, and I've had this marvelous day at the White House. The young people would say, it's off the chain. I knew I was coming because Juneteenth had been made a national holiday, and the president was signing the bill into law, and I was invited to the signing of that bill.
Looking out across this room, I see the advocates, the activists, the leaders who have been calling for this day for so long, including the one and only Miss Opal Lee.
Over the course of decades, she's made it her mission to see that this day came. She's walked for miles and miles, literally and figuratively, to bring attention to Juneteenth, to make this day possible.
You cannot imagine how joyful, how humble, how magnificent the whole thing has been. There may be some of you who don't know what Juneteenth is. The enslaved in Texas were told they were free for 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation freed them. They'd watch in their churches and they'd pray for freedom to come. And it finally did. When General Gordon Granger and 7,000 colored troops from New Jersey and New York made their way to Galveston, Texas. And he read General Order Number 3 that said all slaves are free. When those people came in from their labor and somebody read that to them, we started celebrating, and we've been celebrating ever since. Juneteenth is not a Texas thing. It's not a black thing. We're talking about freedom for everyone. This is the pen.
So I love watching that woman, and there are several videos of her out there on YouTube if you want to learn a little bit more about Ms. Opal Lee. As she talked, I want you to think about that word delay again. So while Juneteenth is celebrated in many areas, there is some nuance, particularly in the area where I live. There are several states, Kentucky and Tennessee, that celebrate August the 8th. So there are 4 longstanding celebrations in Northeast Tennessee, where I live, where folks celebrate August the 8th. So the reason why is that as military governor of Tennessee, Andrew Johnson freed his personal slaves on August the 8th, 1863. Again, 8 months after the Emancipation Proclamation, so the word delay again. And then all slaves in Tennessee were not free until October 24th, 1864. I thought it would be interesting to show just a little bit about the August the 8th celebration, so that you know that while Juneteenth is one of the more popular celebrations, in some areas it's a bit nuanced, and August the 8th is a celebration in Kentucky and Tennessee. So Patricia, thank you.
Summer is a great time for getting together with friends and family. And it's a great time for exploring Kentucky's many festivals with tasty food, cool tunes, and friendly competition. Tonight's show features all of that and so much more. Communities across Western Kentucky have celebrated freedom every 8th of August as far back as 1868. In Russellville and Paducah, Hopkinsville and Allensville, and half a dozen others, 8th of August means something historic, something powerful. So what is the 8th of August?
August 8th is an emancipation celebration that happens in Western Kentucky and Middle Tennessee primarily. I've heard people say they celebrate in a few other places in the country, but I've been in African American studies for a long time, and this is the area that I've known to be celebrated. The celebration can manifest in many ways. It can manifest in homecomings, in family reunions. It can manifest in picnics or in cultural entertainment shows. It can manifest in terms of a basketball game. So different forms of entertainment, different forms of cultural events, and also church.
I always remember those days, because on that day, my father, we were farmers, but my father did not work on the 8th of August. That was it, bottom line. There was no work at all. They always celebrated, family got together, community got together, like today, do barbecues and things like they had in Allensville, Port Royal, all of the small communities get together and do their own little celebration,
So what were we going to be doing on the 8th? We were going to be celebrating families, involving our children, speech contests. We were going to be having a good time, as we called it, Old Freedom. That's what we were going to be doing on the 8th.
Not only was it important because of what it symbolized in terms of freeing of the enslaved Africans. But also at that period in time of a segregated America, you African Americans were not free to, be themselves in terms of recreation. We know that. So August 8th was a time period also for people to come together, family, friends, to be free. That's very, very important. And I know as I've done research and interviews with people, and talked to a lot of the elders in the community, and they told me how important it was to be in a space where you're free. And by that, I mean free from any kind of racial tension. This is one period in time for this particular period on August 8th, whatever that be, that a weekend, 2 or 3 days, however long a particular area celebrates, that there is some freedom that I can have. So then segregation was broke down. So for many people, it didn't have the same significance. But for whatever reason, in this Western Kentucky and Middle Tennessee area, people held steadfast.
Juneteenth is a well-known Emancipation Day celebration, as is January 1st. So how did we end up celebrating on August 8th?
The Emancipation celebration here in Russellville and Logan County has always been known from 1866 till now as the 8th August celebration. Why, I do not have a clue.
Many former British colonies celebrate Emancipation Day in early August, dating back to the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. However, the most commonly accepted theory for the celebration in our area points to Andrew Johnson. On August 8, 1863, on his Greenville farm in eastern Tennessee, the military governor and future president freed his slaves. Knoxville once celebrated Emancipation Day on the 8th of August. Did it spread across Tennessee and into Kentucky?
The celebration began when the slaves learned about the freedom after the passing of the 13th Amendment. And when the news reached here in this particular region, they learned about it and they started celebrating August the 8th. In some of the other areas, they celebrate August the 2nd, August the 11th, and of course, then in some areas, they celebrate Juneteenth.
Another variation of this theory claims that it was news of the Emancipation Proclamation, which went into effect 150 years ago in 1863, which gave the celebration its start. However, many historians are quick to note that the proclamation only freed slaves in states not controlled by the Union, and so its provisions did not free slaves in Kentucky or Tennessee.
So it's still a little up in the air on why, but we know that at least from, and I've looked at newspaper articles, at least from the late 1800s. So we know over 100 years they've all agreed on August 8th in these areas.
Whatever its origins, the 8th of August Emancipation celebration is still an important part of this region's and our nation's past, present, and future.
Why is it important? Because although things have changed, there's still so much work that people have to do in terms of race relations, in terms of diversity, in terms of understanding each other. And that's on all sides of the fence. The enslavement is a part of American history. It's not Black history, it's American history. Not a very fun part of American history. It doesn't make us feel all warm and comfortable.
We come together to celebrate the freedom and the sacrifice of so many African Americans and so many other people to end slavery and to bring people together to show everybody that the important thing is that we get along as people.
Thank you, Patricia. So I've talked about a little bit about the backdrop, the historical perspective, the context around Juneteenth. Now I'm going to kind of bring it forward and look at it from a contemporary perspective. And I've entitled this slide, Juneteenth Not for Sale. And the reason why is because Juneteenth has become extremely popular. We're in a capitalistic society, so it's all about making money. So there's the concern that organizations are commodifying the holiday, or at best, they're being performative in terms of their observation. So a few organizations that you're probably familiar with, you've probably heard something about this, maybe you haven't, but a few organizations have issued apologies, they've canceled events as a result of how they've chosen to highlight Juneteenth. One is the Indianapolis Children's Museum, and one day on their menu, they were having Juneteenth watermelon salad. You probably heard about Walmart. Walmart offered some Juneteenth red velvet ice cream. So that was taken off the shelves. Now you can't see on this particular slide, and I wish I had seen it before, but at the top, at the very top of the slide, it says Juneteenth Soul Food Fest. So the problem here is with the optics, there's no representation. So as Juneteenth becomes more popular and you have all of these celebrations, it's important to recognize the way that Juneteenth is being celebrated, and is it being celebrated in a way that honors the history and the sacrifice of those who were enslaved. Really, Juneteenth should lead organizations to focus on how can we address systemic issues instead of being performative in that, you know, maybe we sent out a newsletter or we did something that we can check off a box. But Juneteenth should lead organizations to move from that performative stage to really addressing systemic issues. So the next slide is really all about me. I had several conversations with friends and just kind of wanted to get their perspective around Juneteenth and the significance of Juneteenth. So I kind of took some of their input and then kind of thought about my thoughts around Juneteenth and why Juneteenth is significant. I believe Juneteenth gives us an opportunity to embrace and celebrate the humanity and resilience of African American people. It also is an opportunity to take pride in African American culture. It's about remembering and celebrating the freedom of our ancestors, but I would say at the same time, looking forward to what that looks like today. Bottom line, it's about valuing human dignity. And Juneteenth is a celebration. There's a jubilance there. It's about celebrating joy in the midst of pain. And lastly, for me, we celebrate, we take the time to celebrate, but then we also recognize that the work continues, that the march continues. Next slide, Patricia. One of the things that I meant to mention in that last slide is that Juneteenth is also a reminder that a mainstay in our struggle for freedom is delay, because as we talked about the history, one of the things that was apparent was that there was this constant delay. So again, Juneteenth is a reminder that a mainstay in the struggle is delay. So whenever I thought about Juneteenth, and it's kind of like what kind of brings it together for me, I was reminded of a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that says, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." When I think about Juneteenth, Juneteenth is an act of resistance on our road to freedom. Resistance to oppression, resistance to marginalization, resistance to being silenced. But when I think about Juneteenth, it's about reclaiming our freedom. Tracy, if you could, thank you.
Being free means we're finally going to be equal to the white man.
I'm talking about Juneteenth. It was the 20th, but the 19th when it was told to us.
It's time to vote for me to take part in this democracy.
Tear them freedom papers up, please, cause we don't need to show ID.
It's June 19th, we celebrate.
Grab a blonde and miscegenate.
Ooh, ain't that something? I can finally whistle at a white woman.
I'ma start a business. I'ma get along. I'ma move to the burbs and buy me a home. I'ma take a vacation and when I'm gone,
They won't burn crosses on my lawn.
I can sit at the counter and roll.
And I won't get sprayed with a fire hose.
When I get reparations, I'ma act a fool. Plant my 40 acres and go strike the mule. My 40 acres and a mule.
Get my 14 acres and a mule. Get my 14 acres and a mule.
Being free.
I also wanted to mention blackinappalachia.org. If you want to learn more about August the 8th, I would recommend that you go to that website. There's all kinds of information out there and some panel interviews that you might find of interest about August the 8th. And that is really all that I have. So at this time, I'm going to open it up for any questions and want you to think about, what does Juneteenth mean to you?
So feel free to raise your hand or to drop a question in the chat.
I mentioned that the New York Times article, and in that article, it was a professor from, I think, maybe the University of Texas at Austin. And one of the comments that she makes is that she feels like, while Emancipation Proclamation happened, she kind of feels like we need to be emancipated again, which was kind of an interesting comment. So I would be interested, in this moment, what does Juneteenth mean to you?
I'll start off and model some vulnerability. As I think about Juneteenth, I am kind of caught in between, we'll say 2, maybe 3 places. One is just like a day for celebration. Like it is a day to like truly do whatever that feels naturally Black, inherently African-American, in celebration, not be kind of tasked with this education that we typically are, especially in whatever spaces we are. And then I struggle with, is that a day that I work, right? Like as somebody who does this work for a living, is that my day off? But also that's also like a prime day to do education. And then third, this kind of balancing of, like you were talking about earlier, in this kind of corporatization of Juneteenth, and what is the resistance to that? And I was just talking to one of my friends who said, like, I miss when Juneteenth was a day that white people left Black people alone. And now we have to go to the parade, and now we have to go to the session, and now we have to do all these things when it could be the day of celebration. So like I'm kind of caught between those 3 places.
That really, that makes sense. And I kind of understand, because I am tasked with planning a Juneteenth celebration. So it's kind of like, I want to really just kind of take in the moment and just kind of enjoy that. So yeah, I totally get that. I see some comments. Patricia, do you see the comments in the chat? Okay. So somebody says, I'm finally learning about this. Why did it take so long? Good question. That word delay. And if I was even thinking as I was getting ready for the presentation, whenever you look at the anti-lynching law, that it took 100 years and over 200 times to get that law passed in March of 2022. So there's this delay that is ever present.
Yes, and someone else mentioned that it is a day to make sure they keep learning more and to not assume that everyone is free.
Absolutely.
A lot of people mentioning an opportunity to continue learning. Someone is voicing the fact that this was not taught in school and wondering, why that is.
That's a big issue. I don't know if it's an issue in Colorado, but it's definitely an issue in the CRT. Okay. So that's, another act of resistance.
I'm seeing a lot of common things like rest, joy, reminder of the fight, learning about supporting our work, freedom for all.
Community, I've seen too, which I think is a big one.
With diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the things that I was in a training here a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about whenever having an inclusive space. So whenever you go into that space, maybe the music is playing and it's music that resonates with you, and you feel like I belong. And I feel like with Juneteenth celebrations, it's this I belong. It's this community. This is my space. These are my people. This is the music. And, I don't have to be concerned about, somebody giving me the side eye that, I don't really like that music, or that's not my, so I love the community part of Juneteenth and the freedom to be in a space where you can be free to be who you are.
Someone in the chat just mentioned, even though I've known and celebrated Juneteenth for over 40 years since I was a child, I'm still grappling with how to define it for me and my Gen Next kids. It seems within the American of African descent community that we're still educating and defining this for ourselves, or am I missing something?
I agree. I agree.
And another comment in the chat I wanted to read. I am pondering an idea around combined effort. If all underrepresented groups were to combine efforts for equalities, days such as Juneteenth could return to days of celebration instead of a day that calls for more action.
I want to highlight something that was in a previous comment around American with African descent in the community, and how there are conversations happening right now around African American and African-American, which are kind of two different ethnic groups? And what does Juneteenth mean at the intersection of kind of those two, because we're still talking about folks who potentially were born within the United States, folks who potentially live within the United States and still are feeling the echoes of enslavement. And that is still very much so a place for conversation.
You know, that's an interesting comment. I have some very good friends who are Nigerian, and whenever all of the conversation around Juneteenth started happening, it was something that just did not resonate. You know, living in Nigeria, there wasn't this feeling of being marginalized or any of that. So yeah, bringing that together is interesting. So we had lots of conversations around Juneteenth and what that meant, because there wasn't really this connection and understanding with the history in this country.
And so I'm looking at the time and just want to take some time to thank you, Tina, so much for being able to be our speaker today and for dropping a lot of knowledge and for opening our eyes on ways in which we can contribute and avoid being performative as a university, as individuals, as people. And so also want to give a shout out to the cause for the phenomenal work they're doing and for everything that they have contributed to this college. We know that they are new, 1 year old, but that doesn't mean that their work hasn't been happening and that it continues to happen. So I encourage you all to continue to support them, to collaborate with them if you are an employee in the college. And also Tina had asked us a question, what's happening in Boulder? There is a lot of celebrations, as John had mentioned. We just dropped that in the chat, link to register. There's a lot of events also happening in Denver, and I will include that in the chat as well. But looking forward to more continuation of these conversations. And again, thank you all so much for being here. We'll stay behind if anyone has any questions. But with that, we leave you to it. If you want to stay behind, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and welcome any questions if folks want to hang out with Tina for about 4 more minutes. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Tina. We appreciate you.